My name is Lindsay Adams. I'm here today with April Bartnick and John Casebolt, and we are Master Teacher Fellows of a 5-year Robert Noyce cohort at SIUC. Our cohort is called the River Region Master Teaching Fellowship in Environmental Sustainability. And as part of our fellowship, we take part in a summer research immersion experience where we practice hands-on, evidence-based scientific research. And in the following school year, we implement our research within our classrooms. Our goal today is to present ideas and tools that we have gained during our summer research immersion experience and how they were used and modified in each of our classrooms. Our classrooms range from a 5th grade special education self-contained room to a general ed high school chemistry class, and you can see from the map that our group is spread out across southern Illinois and southeast Missouri. This summer, our program topic was toxicology. We discussed multiple sources of toxic materials that are being added to our environment, both locally and globally. Our group studied toxicology in water. A way to observe the effects of pollutants in water is by conducting a test on radish seeds. Radish seeds are easy to grow. It only takes a week to grow your seedlings and then measure your radicals. And the radicals are part of the plant embryo that develops into the primary root. We also took part in a citizen science experiment called the Earth Echo International Water Challenge. It was very simple to use. Once you decide to participate, you get a kit sent to you, and it was a great way to engage and promote environmental stewardship within our students. Our group set out to make a unified lesson about water quality across grade levels, and we found some parts of this task to be easy, and then we also came across some challenges. Water quality as a theme works well for all age groups because it's hands-on. Our lesson covers the NGSS, the Missouri, and the Illinois learning standards, and it's a topic that we believe promotes environmental stewardship within our students. And we've also added some outreach components so we can spread our work beyond just our 3 classrooms and reach more people. Our biggest challenge was taking a complex topic like toxicology and breaking it down to multiple grade levels, all the way down to 5th grade special education. It wasn't quite as hard for the high school teachers, but the elementary teachers have found some cross-curricular activities to get their students interested in the topic. But overall, we feel like we've overcome the challenges. So I want to show you a time lapse of the radish test. What we have here is a petri dish of 10 seeds that were grown in a concentration of salt water. Salt is toxic to the radish, and my students and April's students performed a serial dilution, meaning we started with a dish of highly concentrated salt water and then diluted the salt solution across 9 petri dishes. So by the end, you have a very small concentration of salt in your final dish. I use this video as an icebreaker when we started our radish experiment, and right away my students noticed that a few of the seeds didn't germinate, and then that led to some questions and led to a discussion. And then after watching the video, they were still surprised to see that their radish was already growing by the end of day 1. So that was exciting for them to already see some kind of result. So you can see that the result from this experiment is very visual and also measurable. And now I'm going to give it over to April to talk about her water quality tests in her 5th grade classroom.
Hi, April here from Carruthers. A little bit about me. I've been a special education teacher for 15 years now, and currently I am a 5th grade teacher in a self-contained setting, and I teach all academic subjects, and our curriculum with FOSS tied in very nicely with our water quality activities. So in elementary ed, we're always looking for cross-curricular activities. So I did a read aloud with We Are Water Protectors for English Language Arts. And it's a story about protecting Earth's water from pollution and corruption, and it ties into environmental justice. And it was truly inspiring, and the students really loved this story. The background information I taught my students consisted of how humans can affect water quality. We learned about trash going into storm drains and how that can go into local waterways. I also taught students how fertilizers and pesticides can pollute groundwater and how the chemicals that don't get absorbed by the plants or go into the soil can be picked up by the rain and run off into local waterways. And taking that further, we looked at our location in Murfreesboro, and then we looked where the Big Muddy River is located in our area, and we looked at all the farm fields in this area and all the farm fields located by the Big Muddy River. And then we went to Google Maps and we followed the Big Muddy and we saw how it went into the Mississippi River. And also from the excess synthetic fertilizers, I taught the students about algae blooms and how those algae blooms can take up the oxygen in the water. And going back to the Mississippi, we followed it all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, and the students learned about the dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and how it is all related to water quality. So for the student investigation, we did cereal dilution with radish seeds. We had a negative control with distilled water and a positive control with the salt water and the Big Muddy River sample water. I picked the Big Muddy because it's local and the students are familiar with it, and it's surrounded by a lot of farm fields, and it goes into the Mississippi, as I said earlier. So in this activity, I really wanted students to learn how to be better scientists by learning the scientific method and learning about water toxicology, and that they can do water toxicology and they need radish seeds and petri dishes. So in the results, the students learned that the salt water with lower concentrations of salt had longer radicals or roots, and the higher concentrations of salt had shorter radicals, so they were able to see that difference. But the Big Muddy sample water, the results were all over the place, so we rejected the hypothesis. And this was one of the students' first hands-on science investigations and using science lab books, so they really loved it. We transferred our learned skills about water quality and cereal dilutions to citizen science. We used Earth Echo International, and we did the Earth Echo Water Challenge. And we ordered the kits from Earth Echo, and you can see the student down in the corner. We tested the pH, temperature, oxygen, and oxygen saturation. And then when we got those results, we submitted them on the Earth Echo website. And you can see the arrow there. There's the hyperlink where our results are located. The students were super excited to see their data point included in all the other data points from all around the world and to be able to contribute to citizen science. Our environmental stewardship action plan is to do trash cleanup days. We've already done one, and we're going to do a couple more. And then we're also going to present to other classes on how to submit data and conduct the testing for the Earth Echo Water Challenge. The fun part was that we got to do a virtual field trip with Living Lands and Waters. Students from my class at Carruthers in Murfreesboro, Illinois were able to join John's in-person class and remote students from Jefferson Elementary in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And we all went on a virtual field trip together with Living Lands and Waters. And Living Lands and Waters is an environmental organization that does industrial strength river cleanups and education outreach for environmental stewardship and water quality. So the kids really love this. We were all linked up by Zoom conference, and it was projected up on my big screen. and we got to take a tour of the garbage barge, and the students learned about all the garbage that Living Lands and Waters cleans up. And it was mostly about water quality and pollution and environmental stewardship. The students were super engaged and they just really loved it. And it was really neat to go on the tour of the garbage barge. And I even had one student that went home the day of after school, and he and his family cleaned up a pond by their house, and he was so excited to come the next day to tell me all about it. So it was really neat. And John will talk about his experience and his students' experiences with the virtual field trip now.
Thank you, April. And in the next slide, you'll see my fifth grade students during the Living Lands and Waters presentation. The students were extremely engaged, taking notes, and then later on asking questions. But this lesson ended up taking up a whole day. The students just really wanted to know more about water quality, water issues, pollution, and during the process, they wanted to know what they could do to make the world a better place. And as you can see in the next slide, they came up with the idea of a walking field trip. They walked from the school at Jefferson Elementary all the way to the Mississippi River, which is about 2 miles. And the complete round trip that day was just under 6 miles. And they picked up trash and had lunch down at the river. But the other thing that we're participating in, as April had mentioned, is the Earth Echo Water Challenge. And so far we've done 2 water samples, one at the Mississippi River in Cape Girardeau, and the other one is at Hubble Creek, which empties into the Mississippi River. Here you can see the science standards formulating a testable question and creating a hypothesis. Recognizing characteristics of fair and unbiased test, conducting the test, and obtaining and combining information about ways individual communities use science ideas to protect the Earth's resources and environments. And that's what our students really did when they came up with the field trip. Not only did they do the field trip, but they've also taken upon themselves to take over the school's recycling initiative, and they go through every week and collect the recycling for all the classrooms. With the toxicology lab, some of the skills that the students developed was taking a lab and keeping a lab notebook. They learned about the scientific method and how to go back and check your results and reevaluate your ideas. With data collection, during the toxicology lab, they've measured radical lengths and used rulers. Interpreting data was a big one, to be able to make sense of what it is that you're seeing. And then with the distance learning, we did a class collaboration with our virtual students at home. The students at home also did the toxicology lab with the students in the classroom, and we compared notes. As you can see in the next set of slides, the lab journals were actually a nice surprise, some of the things that we found out. With the lab journal, student A was really having a hard time with handwriting, and you can see with just regular line paper, all the words and sentences were just jumbled together and really hard to keep track of anything. And so we gave the students lab journals that were composition books with grid paper in them. And at first he was just continuing to write as he always did. And after sitting down with him and having him realize that he had vertical lines and horizontal lines, that he could use those as a way to space his letters, you can see he tries keeping all of the letters inside the boxes now, and it's a lot easier to read, and he was just really thrilled with his progress. The next student made a comment that mistakes are okay, and his lab partner had made a mistake in her journal and was really upset and wanted a new journal because she didn't want any mistakes. And this young man explained to her, he said, it's okay to make a mistake, and here's how you fix it. And he had remembered me telling him to just put a straight line through it instead of trying to erase it or anything like that. And it was different coming from a student than from the teacher, and she listened and took it to heart, and she's not having near as many meltdowns when she makes a mistake now. The other thing with the toxicology lab was the students forgot to put the tape around the petri dishes, and some of the petri dishes dried out, and so our lab results were inconclusive because of a contaminated lab. And the students were able to sit down and discuss together as a group what the problem was and how to correct it. And so we're redoing this lab starting March the 8th next week, and the students are pretty excited to get to try it again and to improve their results. As you can see in this slide, the students were measuring and not only using the metric system, but also using decimals, and which decimal places is one of the math standards. So with the toxicology lab, it's not just the science standards, but they've also worked on their handwriting, working on measuring, working on decimals, also data collection and organizing their data. You can see in the right-hand side there. So there's just a whole lot of things that this lab does besides just a science standard. This next slide I went ahead and threw in because I have several students that are just really fascinated with science now, and I have two students that have actually come up with their own microscopes, the small microscopes that have the little small battery lights on the bottom, but they're wanting to learn about everything. The next student was one of my virtual students at home, and she was super fascinated when she found out that you could grow seeds and actually grow food. And before this, you know, the food all came from the grocery store. But you can see on the left-hand side here, she's sprouted watermelons, and here's a honeydew melon in the middle. The one I'm the most fascinated with is the apple seeds that she's saved out of some apples and has planted, and she's actually been giving away apple sprouts to her neighbors so they can plant apple trees in the yard. The next part of the project is an outreach through the Sanyo Foundation in Africa. Our students have started pen pal letters with them to learn about water issues around the world, and so we're excited to see where that's going to go. And finally, the students will be creating a poster or presentation or piece of artwork to share what they've learned about water to their family and friends and other classes. Now I'm going to hand it off to Lindsay to tell us more about the chemistry.
Hello again, this is Lindsay. I'm a high school physical science and audiovisual teacher at Gallatin County School, where I've been teaching for 11 years. I integrated topics from our summer research into my chemistry class in the resources and energy chapter. The county that I'm from and that I teach for is a big farming community, mostly crops like corn and soybeans, but in the past was also a big mining community, having its heyday in the 70s and the 80s. The Peabody-owned Eagle II mine was the largest employer within the county, and it closed in 1993. A couple of years ago, the last mine in the county was also closed. So there's a lot of pride within the community concerning these two industries. So when anything negative like pollution is brought up, students and the community members, they get defensive, and then they stop listening to problems that they really need to consider. So I think with an experiment like this one that I'm about to describe, one in which the students make discoveries and see evidence, that they'll really start to think about ways in which these two industries can contribute to water pollution even long after they continue to be in operation. Our county sits on the Saline Valley Aquifer. You can see it in the far right picture. It's the brown area. Most of Gallatin and Saline counties get their water from this aquifer. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see the pumps the Saline Valley Water District has in this small land area. They are labeled SVCD and then a number. And then in that same picture, you can see on the right side, about a quarter of a mile to the east is the abandoned Peabody Eagle II mine, and the sediment ponds are outlined. Water is still being pumped out of the mine and it goes into the sediment ponds. And from there, the solids in the water will float down to the bottom, and the water from the sediment ponds eventually enters a small ditch and will end up in the Cypress Creek. When this mine operated, the mine wasn't required to line these ponds. So there's a possibility that we have polluted water entering our waterways from a variety of sources. And once the students see that the aquifer, where it's located and what it's used for, and realize what it's used for, this really hits home, and they start thinking about ways in which to keep our water clean. My students performed a cereal dilution with radish seeds using salt water as a positive control, and then they got to design their own experiment. They were given water collected from the mining point source and then upstream of that point source where there is a lot of ag activity, and then downstream of the point source where the ditch enters the Saline River. And from there, some of them decided to run a cereal dilution of the point source, and then other groups of students wanted to test all three water samples without diluting them. For our results, my students noticed that they had more growth at the point source than any other location, so we actually didn't see toxicity. And so they hypothesized that this could be due to high levels of sulfate. So they looked up, what kind of minerals would possibly be in the water at this point source, due from it coming from a mine pond. And so they found that it could be due to high levels of sulfate, and the radish could be benefiting from that. And now they want to go back and see if they can run more tests in the water. And so it's important having the students do their research and looking at articles, and then discussing how these unbalanced nutrients can affect the system as a whole. A few of my students helped with the initial water collection, and they conducted the tests for the Earth Echo Water Challenge at the point source. And so those tests that they ran they found the dissolved oxygen, the pH, and they ran a turbidity test at the point source. My students in other classes and clubs are getting involved too. My AV class is making what we call a Go Commercial commercial. Due to the Clean Water Act, it requires professional car washes to pipe dirty water to water treatment facilities or state-approved drainage systems. So washing your car at a commercial car wash is an eco-friendly alternative to washing it at home. Because at home, the detergents, the soaps that you're using on your car, is going to just leak into the groundwater. Our school's new green team has also been designing a website that highlights our sustainability initiatives, and they've included the radish investigation and our Earth Echo experiment and how others can get involved. One of the challenges we stated earlier was working with remote students. This actually worked really well for us. My in-person students made a video of their cereal dilution, and the remote students were given a kit with all the supplies that they needed to perform the experiment. The supplies are generally inexpensive and they're pretty easy to collect. And so at the bottom left, you can see the Petri dishes from one of the remote students. And I'm going to play just a small segment of this dilution video for you. The actual video is about 20 minutes long in its full form.
To get us back up to 100. This is now a 25% dilution, and I'm going to pipette 5 milliliters of this into the Petri dish labeled level 8. Take my coffee filter. Okay, and I will set that aside for later.
So my students have been having a good time doing this all year. For the remote students, they like taking turns being the host of the video or the narrator. So in conclusion, we feel like our goal of presenting the topics of water quality and its effects on plants has been effective in the classroom. And then using tools like the radish test, we have become better scientists, and our students have become better scientists, and our students are gaining skills like field work and data collection, but they've also become interested in protecting the environment. If you have any questions about our presentation, feel free to send us an email, and thank you for your time.